Welcome to the most exciting topic on the internet, Social Security. I'm Matt Johnson with Social Security Education Center. We are a nonprofit dedicated to educating as many Americans as possible about their Social Security options. Today's video, we are going to cover non-covered pensions, what we're going to be talking about. Windfall elimination provision and government pension offsets impact on Social Security benefits for teachers, state, and nonprofit employees. That is a mouthful of a title, but whenever I tell people say non-covered pensions, nobody knows what I'm talking about, so I figured I'd just throw the whole word salad at it. So today we are talking about non-covered pensions, and what is that? Well, essentially non-covered means that while you were at a job, Social Security was not covered, or you were not paying into Social Security, and now you have a retirement benefit from that. Now, quick story to get things started here today. When I first started teaching Social Security classes, I started teaching them in Colorado. I decided one day to go teach a class in Kansas. And so on this non-covered pensions topic, I taught it just like I had in Colorado. And I had some poor lady get tears in her eyes and raise her hand and say, "So you're saying I'm not going to be able to collect all of my Social Security that I was planning on?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just a messenger. It stinks. It happens like that for my mom too." And we go to break, and then I look up on my phone and I see that, hey, actually, the laws are completely different in Kansas than they are Colorado. So, moral of the story, what we're going to talk about today very much is dependent on what state you are in, so be aware. The central question is, did you have a job where you did not pay Social Security taxes, okay, or they didn't withhold Social Security from your paycheck? And if that was the case, do you have a pension or retirement plan from that job? And if so, what we're going to talk about today is probably applicable to your situation. So how do you know if this is applicable for you? Well, take a look at this map here. If your state is either blue, yellow, or orange here, probably going to have an effect. We can see the top. This is like the top 12 percentage of state and local government employees not covered by Social Security. You see my state of Colorado, 76%. Massachusetts, Nevada, Ohio have 100% of their state workers are not covered by Social Security. So check this out to know if this is going to be applicable for you or not. Now here's the plan. We are going to make a series of videos out of this topic, just covering non-covered pensions, because it turns out it's a complex, complicated topic. So today's video, it's part one. What is it? When does it apply? And how does it affect my Social Security benefit? Part two's videos, hey, if I don't have a pension, but I have a 401k, a 403b, 457 from that job, what then, right? Because unfortunately, you can't escape it. Part three is, how do I calculate the effect this will have on my Social Security? We're gonna do a deep dive on that. And then finally, part four is gonna be the history, legislation. Is there any way around any of this? That's what we're gonna talk about in part four. Well, you might be thinking at this point, hang on, Matt, if somebody never paid into Social Security, why would they ever get Social Security? That makes sense that they wouldn't. And yeah, exactly. But the problem is it does go a step further, which is, I'll tell you the same thing I told that lady in Kansas, that poor lady in Kansas. I'm only the messenger here, okay? The Social Security takes it a step further. So for instance, my mom, she worked for the schools for 25 years. She's still working for the schools in Colorado here. She also worked about 10, 12 years outside of the schools where she did pay into Social Security, and she does qualify for Social Security. Social Security penalizes that Social Security so that she's not going to collect if you just looked at her statement, what you would think she would collect, okay? So how does this apply? Well, there are two applicable laws. The first is the windfall elimination provision, the WEP as we call it. This came about in 1983. The second is the government pension offset, also came about with the Social Security changes in 1983. Now the biggest difference between these two is this is for your own work record. The GPO is for a spousal or a survivor benefit. Okay, so if you have a non-covered pension and you have the chance to qualify on your own Social Security record, well then the windfall elimination provision could apply. If you have a chance to collect from a spousal record or a survivor benefit, well now the GPO is going to apply, which is actually more punitive, okay? Couple of things in here. Some examples are, teachers, firefighters, policemen. If you worked for a nonprofit or if you were a pastor where your church didn't pay into Social Security, the windfall elimination provision could apply. GPO is only if you're a federal, state, or local government employee, okay? So it does kind of minimize who the government pension offset is applicable for. But again, the biggest takeaway here is this is for your own work record. The government pension offset is for a spousal. We'll talk about the details here in a minute. Now, you're probably familiar with these pieces of paper here on the screen. This is Wanda Worker. This is straight off of the SSA.gov, the example they give. And the problem with non-covered pensions is you'll get these statements in the mail from Social Security. And the challenge is Social Security doesn't know that, what your retirement plan looks like if you were a teacher or a state employee. All they'll see zeros in these years, okay? And so they're gonna compute your benefit as if you didn't have that non-covered pension, and that's what you're gonna see. So you're gonna get a statement in the mail that shows this number, not knowing that likely it's gonna be reduced. The only thing that Social Security shows on your statement is this little box up in the corner. It talks about earnings not covered by Social Security, and it kind of goes into it a little bit there. So that's why, unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of taken off guard when they find out that that Social Security number isn't the actual number they're going to end up with. Okay, so I think it's important to go over how Social Security is actually calculated to really understand how this takes effect. So that's what we're going to do next. Well, so what is the effect of these two laws? Well, let's start with the windfall elimination provision, the WEP. Again, just to review, this affects your own Social Security benefit, okay? Now, worst case scenario, they're gonna take $587 away from that Social Security benefit. Now, that is for 2024, it goes up a little bit each year, but that's the cap, okay? So it's going to be generally the lesser of $587 or half of your non-covered pension, okay? Now, for the GPO, it's more punitive because there is no cap, okay? So again, this affects your spousal and survivor benefits. The negative effect is not capped. What it is your benefit, so your spousal or survivor benefit is reduced by 2/3 of your pension. So you can start to see, if you have a high pension, like if you have a $6,000 non-covered pension, well, it's going to be reduced by 2/3. Your Social Security will be reduced by 2/3 of that pension, so $4,000. It can completely wipe out your spousal or survivor benefit pretty quickly. And so the effect is that most people, if you have a high pension, you're only going to collect Social Security if you have some of your own work record, okay? So on this side, and it will be affected by the windfall elimination provision, but hey, at least it's not completely wiped away. Worst case scenario is they can take away $587 from your benefit, okay? Now, I did just want to throw up, if you want to, if you're a nerd like me, you want to read these in depth, these are the fact sheets, okay? But if you just Google WEP, W-E-P, fact sheet, it'll pop up right from SSA.gov with the PDF you can read. GPO fact sheet over here. All right, so I think it's important in order to understand the effect and exactly the effect that the WEP and the GPO has on our benefits, I think it's important to really understand, well, how is Social Security calculated in the first place? I'm gonna try to keep it out of the weeds as much as possible, okay? So what Social Security does to calculate your benefit is they take your highest 35 years of earnings, okay? That's called the average index monthly earnings. They index the old earnings for inflation to bring everything up to today's dollars. So let's just say, they take somebody's highest 35 years of earnings paying into Social Security, and it was around $8,000 a month, okay? Well, what that means is when they calculate a Social Security benefit on $8,000, the first $1,174, you get credit for 90% of that, okay? Now this is called the first bend point. The second bend point is $7,078. You're gonna get credit for 32% of that, okay? Now anything above $7,078, you're only gonna get credit for 15%. So Social Security is very much a progressive system. It's designed to give lower income workers a greater portion of their previous employment income in retirement, okay? So you're getting more bang for your buck for the dollars, the lower earned dollars. As you go up the earning scale, you're getting less and less credit from a Social Security standpoint, okay? Now, here's the formula if you're interested, and how you would arrive. So if you had an AIM, an average index monthly earnings of $8,000, you'd have a full retirement age benefit of $3,084. All right, so if you're sitting there and this enrages you, which I understand, it has an effect on my mom as well. And I've seen so many people that are really caught off guard by this. If you want to know the justification from Social Security standpoint, I'm not saying it's right or wrong by any means, only the messenger. From their perspective, what they don't want is a high earner that didn't pay into Social Security. So let's say you were a state employee, you made a good salary, and then the last 10 years you retired, got a nice pension. Then the last 10 years you went and paid into Social Security, okay? Now, likely what that would do is if you got a high paying Social Security job, is you would qualify for, around 1174 in terms of your average index monthly earnings, or even more, right? You'd probably qualify for around $1,000 of Social Security benefit. Now, what Social Security doesn't want is for you to essentially be earning the same from Social Security on top of your nice pension as a low income earner who earned low income and thereby qualifies for the low amount of Social Security because they had low earnings their entire career. So that's their justification. Again, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm only the messenger, but that was what was behind the 1983 changes. Okay, so now that you know how Social Security is calculated, let's go ahead and look at some examples so that you can see exactly how it flows through when the WEP and the GPO are applied. So let's say you have a teacher with average index monthly earnings of $1,500. Okay, so they worked part-time in Social Security, or the last 10 years of their career, they worked at Social Security. Their average monthly earnings were $1,500. So from a Social Security standpoint, normally, and what you're going to see on the statement, okay, here's the formula, 1161, okay? Now, remember that bar chart, the graph that I threw up where you take 90% of that first bend point? That's right here, okay? So how they change this calculation is for WEP, when they apply WEP, that 90 becomes 40%. So now you're only getting credit for 40% of that first 1174, okay? And what that does is it drops the overall Social Security benefit that you are qualified for. And you'll notice that the difference here is $587. Now, a quick note, we're not gonna spend a lot of time on this now, but this number, this 90%, drops to 40% if you have 20 years or less paying into Social Security. Once you hit 20 years, this 40% starts to go up by increments of 5% each year until you get to 30 years. So if you have 30 years of substantial earnings, again, we'll go over that in part 3 or part 4, I can't remember, I think part 4. 30 years of substantial earnings, now you're back to 90% and the WEP doesn't have any effect at all, okay? But if you have less than 20 years, which if you were a teacher your entire career or most of your career is usually the case, this is how the effect flows through, okay? Now let's assume that that scenario that we just talked about with the WEP is you, but now you're married and your spouse has a full retirement age benefit from Social Security of $3,600, okay? Let's say your pension from the state, so in Colorado it'd be from PARA, but your state pension is $3,000, okay? In that instance, remember, this is reduced, your spousal benefit and survivor benefit is reduced by 2/3 of your pension, okay? So when we do that calculation, your spousal benefit, so you are essentially, under normal circumstances, you are able to get half of your spouse's full retirement age benefit, okay? So normally, you know, if your full retirement age benefit was $1,161, your spouse's was $3,600, well, you would be able to get $1,800 because that's half of your spouse's. But because of the GPO, what happens is we reduce that $1,800 by 2/3 of the $3,000, and it completely wipes out any spousal benefit. Now, because of that, Social Security will look at what's available to you from a spousal benefit standpoint, and they'll look at what's available to you from your own work record, and then you would just get your own work record. Okay, so you get $574 in addition to your $3,000 state pension. Now, when, let's say your spouse passes first, and now you're entitled to a survivor benefit. Now, normally, you would just take over whatever he or she was getting. So, okay, so if that was $3,600, that's where you would take over. But because of the GPO, it's reduced by 2/3 of your pension of $3,000, but now you're getting $1,600, okay? So whereas previously, while you were both still alive, you were collecting $574, she was collecting $3,600. But now that he or she has passed away, you are entitled to get a little bit of a step up, even though it will still have an effect from the GPO. You're gonna get $1,600 going forward on top of your state pension. Okay, so now let's say in scenario 2, same situation from your spouse has a full retirement age benefit of $3,600, but now let's double your pension, okay? So instead of $3,000, you're getting $6,000 from your state pension, okay? Now what does that look like? Well, your spousal benefit, you know, of $1,800, still gonna be wiped away by the pension, 2/3 of the pension. Now, the survivor benefit though, 2/3 of your, oh dang it, I didn't change this. So this is supposed to say 6,000. Of course, I'm talking to a bunch of teachers, and I don't fix the final edit. So that is supposed to be 6,000. So 2/3 of 6,000 is 4,000, and so you're completely wiped out from a survivor standpoint as well with that high pension. And so now, going forward as the survivor, you're still just collecting your own Social Security benefit that's been netted out by the windfall elimination provision, or I shouldn't say netted out, but affected by the windfall elimination provision. So you're collecting $574 on top of the $6,000 pension. All right, now before we wrap this up, I do just want to go over some frequently asked questions that I get about this. So some important notes before we finish this up, okay? So if you do get your Social Security statement and you have a non-covered pension, just know that number you see does not take into account your pension, okay? So you need to remember that. GPO is more punitive than the WEP. Because of this, a lot of people, especially if you have a high non-covered pension, you're only going to be collecting your own work record, okay? The only person affected by the non-covered pension is you. Okay, so I get this all the time. It will not affect the Social Security of your spouse whatsoever, okay? If you die first, if they die first, spousal benefits for your spouse, their own work record, it doesn't matter. Even if you pass away and you leave your non-covered state pension to them, it's not going to affect their Social Security whatsoever because it was not work that they did, okay? Only the WEP can be mitigated by putting more substantial years paying into Social Security. So again, we're going to go over this in depth in part 4, but you can't earn more years of substantial earnings and have it mitigate the effects of the GPO, only the WEP, okay? If you have a 401k, it does not mean that you're in the clear, okay? So oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes instead of receiving a defined benefit plan or a pension, you'll get a defined contribution plan, like 401k, 403b, 457. And if that is the case, and we'll talk about this in part 2, you're not in the clear. There's going to be an effect. You do have to make a calculation, and that's what we'll cover in part 2, okay? So this was part 1. What is it? When does it apply? And how does it affect my Social Security? Part 2, we're gonna go over the 401ks, 403bs, 457s. Part 3, we're gonna really dig into how do I calculate this effect it will have on my Social Security. So I'm gonna show you exactly how to get on your Social Security online and look at the effect it will have for you. And then part 4, history legislation. Is there any way to avoid this? Thanks for staying with me for the very fun topic of non-covered pensions. We'll see you next time.